This is TWiT.
Last time we spoke, Apple had restored the app, hkmap.live, that showed police presence in Hong Kong. They have now removed it again, I think finally removed it. Tim Cook sent a memo to internally to Apple employees saying that the company had removed the app after receiving, quote, credible information from the authorities, i.e. the Hong Kong police, and people in Hong Kong that the app was being used maliciously to target individual officers for violence and to victimize individuals and property where no police are present. As a result, Cook said the app violated Apple rules and local laws, and so we have to pull it down. John Gruber was a little critical of that memo, as was Maciej Ceglowski. Maciej is the creator of Pinboard. His blog, idlewords.com, has in the last few months been recording what's been going on in Hong Kong because he's on the ground. And following the protests, Maciej says the first application that the app was being used maliciously makes no sense at all. The app does not show the locations of individual officers at all. It shows general concentrations of police units with a significant lag. The app is aggregating reports from Telegram, Facebook, and other sources. It beggars belief, Maciej writes, that a campaign to target individual officers would use a world-readable crowdsourcing format like this. Can Mr. Cook point to a single example of that? Can anyone? So he says it not only goes against the evidence, it goes against the documentary record of 18 weeks of protests and not even possible given the technical constraints of the app. He also says the second allegation that the app victimizes individuals and property where no police are present. He says, does Mr. Cook have any evidence for this claim? The app does not show an absence of police. It shows concentrations of police. So Gruber concludes, I can't recall an Apple memo or statement that crumbles so quickly under scrutiny. For a company that usually measures umpteen times before cutting anything, it's both sad and startling. Thoughts?
Yep. No, I think I said something very similar. You usually see like Steve Jobs' thoughts on Flash, and you think that, you know, so much time and effort went into this. And Apple's not been known for crisis PR. They've been known for very methodical, very thought out, almost bulletproof PR where you can disagree with it, but you can't just quickly say how it has no foundation or substance. And this just came off as really fast and really fragile and very different than I think we've ever seen comms from Apple before.
And remember, it wasn't public comms. It was intended for the Apple employees. But that doesn't excuse it.
Those always come out. Those no, I think that, you know, that those always come out.
Yeah.
It's a way of issuing a press release without issuing a press release. And what really marked it as kind of gutless for me is that they didn't take a stand as we think it's the right thing to do at this time, given the situation in Hong Kong. It was, we have our hands are tied. It violates local law, and we always say that we have to obey local law, and it violates app developer guidelines, and we always say that things have to. We have no opinion one way or another. It could be any country. If anyone, it's like, oh, for heaven's sake, it's like, just take a stand. Even if it's a stand that you think you're going to get jumped on for, don't just say our hands are tied. It violates local laws. Again, debatable. It violates app guidelines. Well, again, look, are you going to take down the Waze app because it shows people where police are staked out on highways so they can avoid speed traps and drunk checkpoints? It's just gutless.
Lory?
That's exactly, Andy. The point I was going to make was just that when Apple originally pulled it, the developer said, you know, this is not an app to help you, you know, avoid the police. This is not an app to help you find the police. This just shows some things. What you do with this information is out of our hands. So Apple let it back into the App Store under that idea, and then pulled it again because they have, you know, evidence that, you know, it's being used to hurt people. Well, I have evidence that Tinder is used to rape people. So that doesn't mean anything, that like just because somebody is using it inappropriately from its original intent doesn't mean that it should be removed from the App Store, because then under that circumstance, you'd have to pull a lot of things. Like you'd have to pull ways for, showing where there's drunk DUI checkpoints. Like it's the app itself is not committing an illegal act. It's what people are doing with it, which is out of the hand of the developer. And under their circumstances, Apple should have fought against the Chinese government's opinion that it's illegal, which I don't think it is.
Well, let's also reflect on the fact that when they approved the app, the Chinese Communist Party newspaper had this editorial that was, I think, I can't remember the headline off the top of my head, but it was along the lines of "Are as Apple out of their minds?" And the text of the editorial was like, "I can't believe they're aligning themselves with hooligans and criminals, and we should question their motives, and it's an unbelievable step for them to take, given that there will almost certainly be consequences for Apple in the future based on this." And I believe that this editorial, with appropriate translation, landed on the desks of people in Cupertino, and that might have influenced their decision.
It was aimed. It was aimed at them.
Yeah.
It was, read this. This is what the Chinese government, this is what President Xi says. Now what are you going to do?
It is startling how EU regulation cannot affect change as much as a single sigh in a Chinese government application.
And, I don't want to relitigate it, because we spent a long time on last Wednesday on This Week in Google, and again on Sunday on TWiT talking about this. And I don't, I want to sit on the fence on this one. On the one hand, I feel like if you're an American company, you should stand up for freedom of speech, liberty, and if you're in a country that is authoritarian and trying to sell products there, maybe you should rethink your stance there. On the other hand, Apple has a responsibility to its shareholders, if not its stakeholders, to its shareholders to make a lot of money. And there's no bigger market than the Chinese market, and they're making a lot of money there. And so, they're not going to pull out of China, and that's really the choice, is pull out of China or follow the laws in China. It's a tough place to be. Yeah. I'd like to see more spine from Apple, but it's not me. It's not my choice to make. It's their choice to make.
Yeah, that's true. But the thing is, I keep saying this. I don't know where the line is that Apple is not willing to cross when it comes to China. I wish I could say that I knew that there's a line which they would say, no, we will absolutely not acquiesce to this. The fact that. The fact that even the idea of complying with local laws in the United States of America, how many horrendous injustices in the past 100 years have been committed that it was absolutely in line, has actually been underscored and promoted by actual laws that helped these injustices to happen. At some point, they have to say it's not enough that an app simply abides by our developer guidelines. It's not enough to say that it's legal. It does things that are legal in this country. At some point, Apple has to say, either you have to say, here is lines we do not cross. Here's why we're making these decisions. Or they have to stop pretending that they are actually for justice, that they are actually for freedom, that they are actually for privacy, because otherwise they have to really defend themselves against the argument that they are for these things when the optics are good and when it suits them.
We're running a little late. We'll get to... Sorry, I'm talking to somebody in the studio, not you. I'm just telling folks in the studio that we're getting to security now in about half an hour, running a little
okay.
And that's because we started MacBreak Weekly a little late because Leo it goes on and on. It's all my fault.
One thing just worth pointing out is that Tim Cook gets into a lot of trouble because he believes in engagement. And I said last week, it's sometimes engagement becomes appeasement, and you have to be very careful.
Yeah, there's
editorials slamming him for working with the Trump administration. Their editorial slamming him for working with some of the governments that extract rare earth materials in Latin America and Africa. And he is very consistent in this. But to Andy's point, there has to be a line, because there are things, and it's not an Apple question, it's a tech question, because we see all sorts of stuff from all sorts of companies.
It's a question for American companies in general.
Yeah.
American companies broke my heart last week in many, many ways, and it's not gonna. And they've been doing it for weeks. Like there's always like there was a story with, can you still use Emacs? Can you still use Android? Like at what point do you have your own sense of ethics and your sense of products?
Emacs is a great example. Richard Stallman.
Android is too now.
Richard
with
Stallman
all the
wrote
Andy Rubin
it. Andy
stuff.
Rubin created Android. Honestly, we're increasingly surrounded by authoritarian countries. Are you just going to stop selling to everybody?
People are angry with Microsoft for having ICE deals, but also for like being pro-environment, but selling to a lot of anti-environment.
And yet the only tool consumers have, the only tool even journalists like us have, is not buying the products, and for us to call them out. I don't think Tim Cook and Apple would be getting as much heat on this if they didn't constantly say how they stand up for privacy, freedom,
civil liberties,
civil liberties, and environmental causes.
Robert Kennedy.
Yeah, if they didn't say that over and over again, I don't know. I mean, nobody's yelling at Ford Motor Company. Nobody's. I mean, it's just.
I mean, Disney opened Disney Shanghai, right?
Right.
And but it.
Right. So, I don't know what the answer is.
It's there. This kind of opens up like a larger global discussion. I've mentioned this before. Really, there isn't a lot that you can argue against adhering to regulations in a different country. Like I think I had mentioned, like that becomes ethnocentric when we start trying to impose our beliefs on them, though there in some circumstances I do think that we should try to impose our beliefs. But to me, the more frightening thing, the thing that's bigger and deserves more conversation, is how right now, using this example, the Chinese government is influencing how we censor our own people here in the United States by banning people from, Twitch, firing them for being a part of the interview, by fining NBA players for speaking out. Like this is censoring people in the U.S. because of influence from an outside country. That to me is much bigger than we're pulling an app from the Chinese App Store. That's their own country. That's their own thing. It is big, but bigger is that we're allowing another country to censor us because of finance, because of money.
And it's going to happen more and more and more and more, by the way.
Yeah. That's very frightening to me.
It wasn't as big a problem when China was content to suppress its own citizens, but to kind of play a more open, more liberal global game because they wanted to participate in the global economy. But now you're seeing China.
And they're doing it in the open, which if they were doing it secretly, we wouldn't even know about it. But they're doing it in the open, which kind of Streisand affects it at the same time.
That's true.
But it's worrisome when they do it because we don't know all the times they're doing it without telling us.
Good point.
Well, it's just I think there was a part of arrogance in Apple and any other company that said, "Oh, look, we're going to invest in China because look, they're becoming more Western and more open and more exactly."
And they were
like
in
us.
the '80s
until
Tiananmen.
Or they thought it would become more that way by investing.
Exactly. Invite them into the global world, but economy. Yeah.
Instead of thinking that China is its own country, it's its own culture. It's not that they're not trying to become more like us. They're trying to become more like them, which is what every single independent republic tries to be. So I think there was a certain amount of arrogance in saying, well, of course they're going to become the communism is going to go away. They're going to become democracies.
Well, we thought that, by the way, that's
1,000 years of history.
We thought that in Russia. We thought that the Soviet Union, in fact, we did with some success bring down the Soviet Union and liberalize Russia until we didn't.
So Blue Jeans and Beatles records.
Yeah. There is a certain arrogance in the American way of thinking. In fact, it goes back to Great Britain and what they used to call the white man's burden. It is an arrogance that our way is the right way, and we'll just.
And Russia fought back with Facebook bots. Who saw it coming?
We're living in a challenging world, an increasingly challenging world, and it's going to be hard for a company.
We have each other.
Water in 100 years.
We have each other. That's right. Thank goodness. Somebody in the chat room thought of a great conspiracy theory that perhaps by pulling the app, then putting the app back, they were sending a signal to Hong Kong citizens, download this app quickly. And they gave them a few days and then they pulled it finally. Yeah. I like that idea. I don't know if
I would just accidentally enable sideloading in China.
Oops.
Is an exploit.
We didn't mean to.
Oh, sorry.
I think Apple does do that. they do that. I mean, in response to governments asking for information from the phone, they have been working as fast as their little hearts can to put more and more stuff under encryption. So they do that. They do act kind of quickly before anybody notices. Let's make the whole thing encrypted.
That's not going to matter if a country, and we're not just talking about China here, simply passes
England
a
and
law
Australia.
That simply says that, well, if our law says that the government is entitled to all the data that's on a phone, if you want to just encrypt it and then let us decrypt it, that's fine.
We don't care how you do it, but you better give us the clear text.
That sounds like an Apple problem, not an our government problem.
Yeah, and right now that's England and Australia asking for that, of course, following along on Russia, China, and other countries. And I think it's only a matter of time. Already our government, the American government, has been demanding similar features, back doors.